and driven. But I think they make sense in John as we back up a little and realize that in all things and in all ways, John was a nurturing teacher. He wanted to share with others what thrilled and delighted him. He experienced such fullness as he did things well, pressed on, achieved what he set out to do, and he wanted to help others achieve the same kind of satisfaction that he did. And he wasn't just dedicated in his work, which he did with great skill and success, but he jumped into everything with his whole self. He was a gifted athlete, playing rugby, cricket, and field hockey as a young man. As an adult, he was a dedicated golfer, which I'm told is really an understatement, a biker, and he loved sailing. He was a wonderful game player, and he joined in party games and loved parties, shows and movies and music. Apparently, John wasn't a very good singer or bell player, but he tried both just to see if he might be good at them. Over and over again, we see John nurturing life both in himself and in others, never wanting to miss out on a good opportunity to learn or improve or succeed. His friend Bart Portel said that not only would John be the first one on the golf course as the sun was just beginning to rise, but most likely John would be the last person on the golf course at the end of the season. They would often need gloves to play, and in fact, one time he said they were at the 16th hole when it began to snow, and John turned to Bart and said, "We might as well finish." So they drove on through as the snow covered the green. John nurtured in so many ways. For years, John would set up a cup of tea on a warmer beside Fiona's bed so that when she awoke, it would be waiting for her. And he insisted, apparently, on learning everyone's names when he helped with field hockey or whenever he was a part of a group. And he treated his patients truly as if they were his own family, listening to them and helping them to decide the treatment that was best for them, that they could believe in and trust in and be healed by. John's ability to nurture life made him brave. He was a gifted surgeon who made a name for himself early, and he was very good at what he did. But as the protocols for best practices changed, from open body surgery to laparoscopy and then to robotic, John adapted and became gifted in each new technique. His drive and his commitment enabled him to always be growing, always be bettering, always be making things more for those around him. And John loved. He loved Fiona. They were well matched in intelligence, in a shared spirituality, in appreciation of the theater and their community and of the big, wide world, of their families and their friends, and the fullness of life that they shared. And in particular, together, they loved their 3 children and all their children's family and friends. And John loved God. He was not angry with God regarding his illness. He was frustrated, but he dealt with it with amazing humor and grace and dignity and courage. And he was not afraid to die, which is an extraordinary thing for all of us to see and to understand. I encourage you in the days and weeks, months, and years to continue to tell one another stories about John downstairs in our reception, but long after today. His life is full and rich as we remember it. If you have been blessed to know John Allen Heaney, you have been blessed indeed with the friendship of a man who lived well, who nurtured fiercely, and who knew and shared joy. Thanks be to God for John. Thanks be to God.
morning. I just wanted to start by sincerely thanking everybody for coming here to celebrate Dad. People come from all over the country, yet all over the world to be here. I also want to acknowledge the people who are not here but are watching live on Facebook. Hi, everybody. Thank you, Mark Zuckerberg. So I guess I should probably start with a confession. Growing up, I was convinced that my dad wasn't a doctor. I actually thought he was James Bond. Hey, I was a kid, and from a kid's perspective, all the telltale signs were there. First of all, he had the accent, obviously. He had the whole tall, dark, and handsome thing going on. He wore a suit, looked dapper when he went to work, came home exhausted and slightly disheveled. And he was obsessed with the latest in technology. I mean, we had a Commodore 64. So clearly, he was a spy. I can distinctly remember riding the back seat of the car and checking out all the buttons, and the one for the rockets, and the one for the dump the oil slick. And just about every road trip, he would catch my eye in the rearview mirror, and he'd kind of slide his hand back past the ejection seat and wink at me. And I'm like, and he'd give my leg a squeeze. So I felt like I drew the short straw, having to speak in front of hundreds of doctors and Ivy League professors, and having to struggle with how to sum up the life of my own personal superhero. So really had no idea where to start. When you talk about everything, you end up talking about nothing. So eventually, I reflected on something Mandy said to us when we met with her shortly after Dad's death. And to paraphrase her, and this is wildly out of context, she said, often the thing that most annoys you about someone is the flip side of their strongest trait. And so all I had to think about was what drove me crazy about him. And the one thing that came to mind was definitely he was stubborn and strong-headed. So I'll provide you a recent example. He was diagnosed with PSP 4 years ago, and probably thinking back, the first symptoms probably started showing up 4 to 5 years before that. And in order to avoid falls, most people, that's his later stages of PSP, are bedridden, or at least very least in a wheelchair. But Dad obstinately refused to do that. Although mundane tasks had become monumental challenges for him, he continued to try to do them on his own. He would pick up the glasses from the floor. He would walk across the room to get a book off the shelf. He'd even want to fix his own tea in the kitchen. And for us, it was driving us crazy because we were fearing for his safety. Mom would often say, "John, I'd rather pick up the glasses than pick up you." But this strong-headedness was just the flip side of one of his strongest traits, the burning need to rise up and meet a challenge. When we entered at the beginning here, we heard the song Für Elise on the piano. And for Mom, Denton, Leah, and I, that song will forever be connected to Dad. We've heard the opening refrain, the dee-dum, 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 dum-dum-dum-dum. We've heard that part 1,000 times. The rest of the song, I have no idea how it goes. And because that song was a challenge for him. Yet every so often, he had plenty of other songbooks to choose from and plenty of songs to choose from. It didn't matter. On a regular basis, he would sit in front of the piano, he would pull out that song and get to the challenge of mastering that song. He was always looking for a challenge. I remember in this very church, kind of somewhere back there behind the Facebook people, it was during a Christmas service, and we were singing "Away in a Manger," and it sounded like he was totally butchering it. I'm like looking at him with that, that middle school, part embarrassed, part disgusted look. I'm like, "Dad, what are you doing?" And he says, "I'm singing the harmony." Who sings the harmony? But it was his approach to those two songs that really embodied his attitude towards life. He embraced the challenges. There are two stories from his early medical career that he often told. The first was from a class in medical school. I don't remember which one it was. Mom said it might have been molecular biology. I don't know. But it was very difficult for him. And he really didn't like it. And he was truly afraid he wasn't going to pass. So mostly out of fear and necessity, he worked harder than he'd ever had to, just in the hopes of passing that class. And of course, in the end, he finished with the top marks in the class. The second one was a time when he was expressing to his mentor that he intended to be a surgeon. And he was told by the mentor that he lacked the necessary skills, the deftness or the finesse in his hands, and he should choose another path because he would never, ever be a surgeon. Clearly, Dad's response was, "Challenge accepted." We all know Dad loved sports. In his youth in Ireland, he played cricket and rugby, but especially he excelled in field hockey. As an adult, he loved golf, skiing, biking, and sailing. He loved it all. And he was tempted by more of the elite equipment when he tried these things out. The driver that hit longer, but the sweet spot was like that big. So the cross-country skis that would glide forever, but when it came to downhills, they weren't that forgiving. The sailboat that could catch just even the subtlest hint of wind, but really liked to capsize. These were all his favorite. And despite being deathly afraid of heights, when he was in his youth, he went mountaineering in the Austrian Alps and was nearly arrested when trying to take a shortcut through Yugoslavia. True story. Wait, that definitely gives more evidence to the whole spy thing, just putting that out there. Anyway, the point is, he was always willing to challenge himself and push the physical limitations. Even towards the end of his medical career, at a time when many would rest on their laurels and play it out until retirement, he was in pursuit of a challenge and improvement. He spoke with such energy to me about his love for the Da Vinci, his passion for the Da Vinci. His fascination with that robot may have been in part because he saw it as a way of extending his career, but more likely it was a new challenge in a field that he'd already mastered. Now, that's not to say he didn't face these challenges without a fair bit of frustration, and many of us have experienced that. But that's the challenge in a challenge, is finding that sweet spot of difficulty. Too easy, you get bored. Too hard, you get frustrated. And you knew Dad was in that sweet spot when his tongue started poking out. And playing golf. Snooker, he'd be on. And probably doing surgeries. Not that you'd see it because they had masks, but it was there, I promise. As he grew older, his body began to betray him. He survived both cancer and a heart attack. He had countless surgeries on his back, his neck, his wrist, his shoulder. And of course, there's PSP, which turned formerly simple tasks into monumental challenges. Nevertheless, he continued to approach them with that same grit, tenacity, and determination as he did the challenges of his younger years, stubbornly. For me, an everlasting part of his legacy is one that I shall try to instill, and I continue to try to instill my two boys. Don't shrink from the challenge, rather rise up to meet them. Seek them out. After all, that's what James Bond would do.
Up and On by Winifred Heaney.
When you're knocked by something that has gone all wrong, waste no time in crying, you must journey on.
Jesus, He is with you, traveling by your side. If one road gets shut down, others open wide.
God is surely with you, ever by your side. Place your life in His hands, He will be your guide.
Please stand if you are able to join in the hymn number 79, "The King of Love, My Shepherd Is," in the red hymnal.
Whose goodness never
Please be seated.
Good morning. I met John in 1993 when he interviewed me for my current position. The interviews that I had here were very different from those that I had anywhere else. John encouraged me to plan to spend the weekend so that I could learn more about the area. He knew I was a skier, so he took me skiing on both my interviews. John thought I came here because of the skiing. But I didn't. I came here because through the Heaneys and those 2 weekends that I spent with them, I realized that this is a very special place. And it would be a great place to work and to live. Later when I moved here, the Heaneys' hospitality continued. I was often, as I'm sure many of you were, welcome to their home. The Heaneys introduced me to a variety of arts and theater organizations in the Upper Valley, and it was always a treat to attend a Celtics game with John. John was my chairman, my mentor, and my friend. For many years, John and I took turns buying one another a latte in the afternoon. As we handed off the coffee to one another, it was a few moments where we shared what had happened that day. It was what we both used to get through the charting and phone calls at the end of the day. John was driven. I didn't realize that we weren't supposed to only say nice things, so I'm only saying nice things. But John had great expectations for himself and for those that he hired. It was expected that you would do what you needed to do to get promoted. John had served for many years on the promotions committee at the med school, so he knew what was required, and he supported all of us in those efforts. No matter what any of us went to John about, whether it was applying for a grant, serving on an NIH review panel, participating in a guideline, or running for office, he always took the time to listen to what we wanted and then encouraged us to do it. He ensured us that the section would run despite our being away. John was very proud of the role that he played in organized urology. As a past president of the New England section of the American Urologic Association, John always attended the past president's dinner, including this past September when he came to Montreal with great difficulty. John often said that as academicians, we had a duty to be involved. I'm leaving from here to attend the New England AUA Winter Board meeting. Tonight at the dinner, I'll propose a toast to the memory of John and the service he had for our board. John was a consummate surgeon. If you needed help because of bleeding or because you just weren't progressing, John was the guy to call. He was the master of retraction. He would come in, repack the bowels, rearrange the blades of the book Walter, move the operation on, and make it all look so easy. John loved to teach. I've had many emails this past couple of weeks from former residents, and many of the former residents are here. But Catherine Schwender sent me an email last week where she said, "I always think of John when I'm giving a presentation, as he hammered us on how to present. But I'm a better presenter and lecturer because of his teaching. He taught professionalism, the ethical practice of medicine, and surgical technique. He explained every detail." Catherine was one of over 30 residents that John trained at DH, and I'm sure that all of the rest would agree with her sentiments. John was the physician's urologist. Initially, when he came to DH, he did everything. As he hired more increasingly subspecialized urologists, he ensured that the right people did the right case, regardless of who the patient was. However, he would always fit a fellow physician in before or after clinic, and he was known to operate on a colleague or resident on a weekend to get them in quickly and because it was the right thing to do. John was a self-taught laparoscopist and robotic surgeon, and by the end of his career, he was primarily doing robotic radical prostatectomies and doing them extremely well. John was beloved by many and known for his friendliness and for being a nice guy. He had a tender soul and a big heart. He was most upset when he couldn't be there for his wife or children because of the demands of his schedule. John was also known for his kindness for the people that worked for him, especially when they were going through a tough spot. When John and Fiona learned of John's diagnosis, they made the very best of a bad situation. Although John wasn't going to be able to get back on the golf course or do many of the things he had hoped to do in retirement, they adapted and lived life fully, including trips to visit family and friends in the US and abroad, including river cruises in Europe and China. Retirement allowed John to see more of his children and his grandsons. Around the time that John and I first started taking turns buying coffee for one another, we both were dealing with an ill parent. John and I often commiserated with one another about the helplessness of being the physician child of an ill parent who was thousands of miles away. Back then, in 2003, John was healthy, fit, and at the prime of his career. But John talked then about the kind of death he wanted. When Richard and I visited John in mid-February, I was pleased that he was at home and comfortable. He seemed at peace. John died a good death at home, surrounded by those he loved. Hopefully, he knew the impact he had on so many of us. I miss him so much. Thank you.
I'm honored to speak today about John. He was a good friend. I'm a pretty standard low friend guy, and so that places John into a pretty exclusive group. In the race through life, John has me beat by a dozen or so years, and though I've always been too proud to tell him to his face, until right before the end when I told him, and I believe he was so stoned on THC that he didn't understand what I said and may have thought I was a purple elephant at that moment. I looked to him at what lessons he has learned and how to measure how I am doing in life. In some things I observed in him are good examples and some not so good. I have a condensed listing of the top 12 life lessons I've taken from John. Number 1, marry a good woman that can tolerate your long work hours and the flashes of frustration that come to men as their bodies age. Preferably, if you can, marry a pretty nurse. Luckily, I checked that box. However, it may not be a good idea to introduce your spouse as my woman at a national medical meeting. Number 2. Instead of sleeping, spend hundreds, more likely thousands of hours trying to perfect a golf swing. I just didn't do that one. Number 3, it's a good idea to buy real estate without telling your wife. I've tried scouring Boston, the landscape, for overpriced, empty, rocky lots that have no perceivable purpose that I could buy without telling my spouse, but I failed to find one. Number 4, be hard on your sons, because one day they'll realize the world won't be as gentle on them as their mother wishes it would. But be soft on your daughter because, well, she's your daughter. This goes without saying. Number 5, returning from sabbatical in Australia with a windsurfing-related back injury might raise suspicions of what in the heck you were doing over there. Number 6, once you're over 45 years of age, do not compete athletically with men who are 10 or more years younger than you, especially if you're stubborn and have far too much pride to stop when it hurts. Refer back to the comment about flashes of frustration. Number 7, drive flashy single-guy cars like a convertible Saab that couldn't possibly hold a car seat or be much use getting back from the store, but somehow managed to hold a bag of golf clubs. Number 8, working at a famous hospital in the city isn't worth it. Move to Hanover, work at Dartmouth, live in a patch of woods in Etna with a hot tub, and putz around a goose pond. I believe I misheard this. I thought he said it was worth it to live in the city. So, flipped that on the wrong way. Number 9, be sure to train people to care of diseases that you may get so that they'll be able to take care of you when you get that disease, to his residence. Number 10, college girls won't think it's a little creepy that you volunteer to help out coaching their field hockey team. Number 11, tell your wife that the cheapy statues on the beach in the Dominican Republic are exactly what you were considering buying, and that the additional 40 pounds of return luggage won't be an issue. Well, you may have noticed that I've used the present tense when referring to John. It's not an autocorrect error or a surgeon not wanting to dwell on grammatical detail. One lesson John shows me by example, and it can only be shown by example, is that through his action, he has become an entity that's both a part of him and fully separate from him. Our society has come to associate persona with celebrity, and would be more than a bit presumptive to lump John in with Larry Bird, Barack Obama, or Jay-Z, though any of those would make him seriously happy. His persona, his family, his life's work, the residents he trained, the strangers he sacrificed himself to serve, the ways in which he changed his small piece of the Upper Valley and his niche in the wide world of medicine live on, despite some stupid neurons above his nuclei, wherever in the brain that happens to be, somewhere in the middle it appears to be. And where is Vijay Thadani when you need him? Decided that they were done working. I don't yet know the 12th life lesson that I will derive from being John's friend, but I look forward to finding out. Thank you.
Thank you so much, all of you, Max and Leo especially. Let us pray. O God, before whom generations rise and pass away, we praise you for all your servants who, having lived this life in faith, live now eternally with you. Especially we thank you for John Allen Heaney, for the gift of his life and for all the grace you gave him that kindled in him the love of your dear name and enabled him to know and love and serve you as he cared so graciously for those around him. Throughout John's life, he lived with honor and integrity as unto you. And we thank you for all the ways he blessed each of us, offering lesson beyond lesson beyond lesson. We thank you now for John. All death and illness and sickness and sorrow are past, and that he has entered into the joy that you have prepared. And we thank you, O God, for all those we have loved and love still. Give us such faith that by day and by night, in all times and in all places, we may without fear entrust those who are dear to us to your never-failing love. In this life and in the life to come, through Jesus Christ the Lord, who taught us to pray, saying, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our sins, as we forgive those who sin against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen. If you are able, please stand for our final hymn, and it is in the black hymnal. In the bulb there is a flower.
From the past, from the future.
Please be seated. John O'Donoghue is an Irish poet who captured so many things extraordinarily well. And he himself died unexpectedly at 58. This is a blessing that he wrote for those who have died, and I offer it to John. May there be some beautiful surprise waiting